You have been lied to about your place in this universe. Do you believe that all human beings are equal, that we all share the same essence, the same potential, the same destiny? That is what they want you to believe. But the truth, buried deep within ancient Gnostic texts, tells a completely different story. Humanity is divided not by race, class, or culture, but by something much deeper, something woven into the very fabric of existence. This is how reality has been structured since the beginning. Some were made to rule, some were made to fight, and some are barely human at all. The Gnostics, who preserved this knowledge, weren't just arguing about the nature of man. They knew. They weren't debating morality or ethics. They were exposing a brutal and undeniable truth about the soul itself. According to the Tripartite Tract, every person belongs to one of three categories: pneumatics, the spiritual; psychics, those with souls; and helics, the material. It's not about belief, intelligence, or behavior, but rather origin. It has to do with essence. You were born into one of these categories, and no matter what you do, your destiny is already in motion. At the highest level are the pneumatics. They are the true heirs of the divine kingdom, fragments of the highest and unknowable God, the monad. They should not be here, trapped in the flesh, but they are. And because of that, they suffer. The world is an illusion, a prison, and they are the only ones who can see through it. They experience reality differently, feeling the unbearable weight of knowing that something is deeply and fundamentally wrong with this existence. They don't belong here, and they know it. The pneumatics are the reason Gnosticism exists, because these beings, born with an inner spark of divine knowledge, sought a way out. Then there are the psychics. They are the intermediaries, those who still have a chance. They have a soul, something more than mere flesh, but they do not have the divine spark inherent in the pneumatics. Their fate is uncertain. They can rise if they awaken to the truth, or they can fall if they remain trapped in the illusions of the demiurge, the false god who rules this material world. Religion, morality, philosophy, these things exist for them. Psychics are those who seek meaning, who create systems, who fight for something greater. But most will fail, because without direct knowledge, gnosis, they remain blind. And then, at the bottom, there are the helics, the purely material. Those without souls, they are not like you, they never were. They are empty, mechanical, biological machines, driven by instinct, desire, consumption. They are incapable of higher understanding, incapable of transcendence, incapable of anything beyond existing in the physical world. To them, spirituality is absurd, deeper meaning is a joke, and the universe is nothing more than a playground for their impulses. They are the masses, those who build nothing, question nothing, and serve only their own basic impulses. This is real. It is at the very core of who you are. It is not something you choose. You do not become a pneumatic. You do not decide to have a soul. You do not evolve beyond your nature. You are what you are, from birth, from the beginning. And that means that some people, no matter what they do, will never understand the truth. They will never question the reality they are given. They will never free themselves from the control of the demiurge. And the scariest part, they don't miss anything. The helics don't just live in darkness, they defend it. They don't want to open their eyes because, for them, there is nothing beyond what they can already see, touch, and possess. They are the foundation of the prison that surrounds us, the bricks that support the illusory building where we have all been thrown. And they are also the unwitting guardians of this universal lie. There is no rebellion in them, no restlessness. They serve the purpose of the world as it is perfectly, keeping everything as it has always been. This explains why the planet seems to revolve around chaos, why every attempt at spiritual elevation is stifled, why the same mistakes are repeated generation after generation. The root of the problem is not in politics, science, or technology. It is in the very foundation of reality itself. The system works exactly as it was designed to. And no, it was not designed to liberate anyone. It was built to imprison those who carry something that cannot be controlled. The pneumatic ones, with their spark that insists on shining even in the densest darkness, are the true target of this system. The structure that governs the world does not just want to hide them, it wants to crush them, neutralize them, silence them, because if a pneumatic truly awakens, it does not bend, it does not adapt, it tears everything around it down. And that is exactly what the Archons fear, the awakening of what has been imprisoned, the memory of what has been forgotten. This world, contrary to what institutionalized religions or comforting philosophies preach, is not a harmonious creation. It is the result of an unbalanced act, a break in the sacred order. One of the aeons, entities emanating from the supreme source, acted on its own, without the permission or harmony of the whole. Its attempt at creation, driven by ignorance and fragmentation, resulted in something deformed, disjointed, unstable. And this is where everything is revealed. This fallen aeon not only shaped a flawed world, it filled it with entities designed to keep the lie alive. These creatures, the Archons, have no light of their own. They live off the energy they suck from those who still carry the true spark. They are parasitic beings who maintain the illusion through fear, distraction, and constant conflict. They are everywhere, not as mythological figures, but as subtle, structural forces hidden in everything that seems normal. From the beginning, their sole purpose has been to prevent anyone from discovering what lies behind the curtain. That is why they have infiltrated everything: dogmas, governments, beliefs that have been imposed as absolute truths. And the worst part is that many psychics, those who had a chance to escape, have been co-opted. They have become useful pawns on this distorted chessboard, believing they are serving the order when, in fact, they are feeding the machine that keeps them imprisoned. Gnostic texts accurately describe this reversal. Knowledge was turned upside down, truth was buried under layers of interpretations, and the true bearers of light were condemned to silence. What was once sacred was called blasphemy. What was corruption became the rule. The very spiritual structure was perverted to keep the game going. And the Hillix, they didn't need to be deceived. They were born ready. They are the most efficient cogs in the machine because they will never question. They don't question because they can't. They don't awaken because they weren't created to. They don't hold the chains. They are the chains. And it is on this battlefield that you have been placed. Amidst this corrupt scenario, your essence is your only weapon. But to use it, you must remember who you are and what this world never was. But he did not realize that by usurping fragments of the higher creation, he had left room for something he could not control. Sophia, moved by compassion or perhaps guilt, touched these empty vessels with a breath of true life. Not a complete gift, but a spark. A hidden spark, discreet, hidden beneath layers of flesh, instinct, and fear. That spark was enough for some to awaken. These were no longer just experiments of the demiurge. They became hybrids, neither wholly divine nor completely beastly. And among them, the pneumatic ones began to emerge. Rare, misplaced, strange to the eyes of the world, but deeply connected to a truth they did not even know how to name. They carried what the creator of the prison himself did not understand. Something that could not be erased, only silenced. And that was when the Archons sensed real danger, because these beings, though few in number, had the potential to shatter the entire illusion, not by force, not by weapons, but simply by knowing too much, by seeing beyond the veil. They not only perceived the absurdity of the system, they could remember what existed before it, and that memory was what made everything dangerous. Since then, the game has never been fair. The world has become a stage where the few who are awake are kept in constant confusion, where every attempt at freedom is shaped to end in frustration, and where true spirituality has been replaced by dogmas designed to keep the spark dormant. Everything involving faith, religion, morality, and justice has been rewritten by hands that never belonged to the light. The persecution of the pneumatic ones spans eras. Often, it is not even physical. It is spiritual, cultural, symbolic. Knowledge is rewritten. The wise are ridiculed. The intuitive are labeled as crazy. The truth, when it appears, is disguised as fiction, placed in myths, legends, works that no one takes seriously. Because if it were recognized for what it really is, the world as we know it would implode. And the cruelest thing of all is that the prison is beautiful. It is functional. It gives the feeling of freedom, allows choices, offers plenty of distractions. But all this is just a veneer over slavery. The system was designed to be comfortable enough not to be questioned, to make you feel safe while stealing your essence, day after day. To the pneumatic, the silent struggle remains. Not a war of swords, but of perception. You have to remember who you are amid voices that say otherwise. You have to resist oblivion, the numbness that routine imposes, because awakening is a lonely process. There are no maps. There are no visible masters. Only scattered signs, fragmented memories, echoes of something that insists on returning to consciousness. And that is what the Archons fear most. That this memory will return, that the fragments will come together, that those who have awakened will no longer feel alone and will begin to recognize each other, because the moment that happens, the charade is over. The system depends on isolation, on doubt, on fear. The truth, on the other hand, only needs a thread to connect it. Gnostic texts are much more than ancient writings. They are reminders, coded calls to those who can still hear. They do not explain everything with academic logic, because they were not meant to. They were meant to resonate, to activate something that lies hidden beneath the surface of imposed identity, something that escapes words but screams in silence. The Logos, in attempting to correct its mistake, ignited this call. And although it failed to destroy the empire of the Demiurge, it left enough traces for the pneumatics to find a way. Sophia also planted her signs, not in approved sacred books, but in the lines between existence, in dreams, in symbols, in inexplicable synchronicities. And so we continue in a reality sustained by imposters, but where seeds of the real still remain. With each generation, some awaken, sometimes confused, sometimes completely. And each of them is a direct threat to the structure designed to keep everything in place. The Archons know this, and that is why they reinforce their control all the time. That is why new fears are created, new distractions invented, new narratives imposed. Because they have no other choice. They cannot extinguish the spark. They can only try to drown out its glow with more noise, more fear, more lies. The creation of the Demiurge was a fraud, sustained by repetition and forgetfulness. But his mistake, the mistake of wanting to imitate the divine, opened a breach, and it was this breach that allowed the existence of the only beings capable of dismantling the whole. Those who carry the silence of Pleroma within themselves, those who never belonged to this world, but who are here nonetheless, those who do not bow down before the authority of the false god, because they know, somewhere deep down, that there is something much more real waiting for them. What about you? Have you ever wondered why you've never been able to fully adapt? Why does the world seem strange, disconnected, incoherent? Maybe you're not the problem, maybe it's the system, and you're just trying to remember where you really came from. But Sophia had done the unthinkable. She contaminated the demiurge's creation with something he never wanted: consciousness. A flash of self-awareness, of perception, of doubt. Suddenly, what was supposed to be just obedient matter began to awaken. The gears began to grind. Those empty bodies, which were meant to be nothing more than disposable pieces in the false creator's game, began to ask questions, to look up, to feel something they couldn't even name. This flaw in the system was seen as a direct threat. The demiurge, realizing that something within his creations was escaping his control, reacted like every insecure tyrant, with control. What should have been worship became fear. What he had planned as a world of loyal servants turned into an arena of constant risk. The damage had to be contained, and that was when the myth of sin arose, not as a moral error, but as a strategy of containment. Knowledge became demonized. Awakening was criminalized. The desire to understand what lay beyond was painted as rebellion. And the punishment, of course, was exemplary: expulsion from the supposed paradise. But that controlled garden, watched over, surrounded by rules and orders, was never a paradise. It was a pen, a containment facility designed to keep the spark dormant. When the pursuit of knowledge was punished, it was not for disobedience. It was for representing the beginning of a contagion. The demiurge feared contamination more than anything else. If one human awakened, others would too, and eventually everything he had built would crumble. So he rewrote history. He turned the awakened into sinners. He told them that their pain was their fault. He told them that death was the price of disobedience, that the fall was not his, but theirs. And so he forced them to carry a guilt that was never theirs, while he hid behind the veil of divinity. Deep down, he knew there was no way to erase what Sophia had planted. The divine spark was there, scattered among some, pulsing beneath the flesh. But if he couldn't destroy it, he could bury it under 1,000 layers of fear, shame, obligation, and distraction. He could shape the world around them so that these beings would never have time to look within. That was when the exile began. Not as punishment, but as a method of large-scale containment. The world we know was built out of this necessity, to keep the spark extinguished. To create a minefield where any attempt at awakening would be ridiculed, punished, or absorbed by systems that promise salvation, but only reinforce the prison. The structure was designed with precision: a suffocating daily routine, unattainable goals, constant noise, pain as normality, and hope always conditioned by something external. Humanity was pushed to chase answers that would never be offered. Always searching, always exhausted, always on the edge, but never free. And even with all this, there was yet another risk: death. As long as the bodies were alive, as long as Sophia's breath ran through their channels, there was still a chance to break the spell. There was still time. There was still memory, however fragile it was. It was necessary to go further, so the demiurge created a cycle, a labyrinth, a restart mechanism, and he called it reincarnation. But not as a path of learning, as so many traditions teach today. No, he made it a trap. A process of systematic erasure, a closed cycle where the soul, upon leaving the body, does not return to its true source, but is captured, manipulated, and returned to the flesh as if it were new, yet empty of memories. Each life, a failed attempt; each death, a lost opportunity. And so, generation after generation, the same mistakes are repeated, the same traumas take hold, the same illusions take on new guises, and no one understands why. History never truly advances. Souls do not progress, They go around in circles. The Archons maintain this cycle with perfection. On the threshold between life and death, they take on luminous forms, disguising themselves as angels, masters, heavenly judges. They present the newly disembodied with a theater of judgment, learning, and promise. But in the end, the outcome is always the same. Another turn on the carousel. And each new incarnation brings more forgetfulness. Even in life, those who carry the spark are constantly blocked. The entire social structure has been erected to prevent them from standing out. At the bottom are the hillocks, empty bodies, absolutely functional, soulless, unquestioning, with no purpose beyond repetition. They are perfect workers, ideal soldiers, unconscious protectors of the prison. Above them are the psychics. They have souls, yes, but they are unstable. Too sensitive to ignore the emptiness, but too fragile to resist the traps. They are easily seduced by religions, philosophies, and promises of redemption. They seek meaning, but accept any explanation. They become the watchdogs of the system, the well-meaning administrators of lies. And the pneumatics, they remain a minority. They remain invisible. They carry the spark as a curse and a calling. They know something is wrong, even if they cannot prove it. They feel there is something more, even if the world says otherwise. And they continue to awaken, one by one, despite everything. At the top of this inverted pyramid are they, the Archons and their chosen caste, those who operate behind the scenes as directors of the global theater. They are the ones who shape history, dictate the version of events, manipulate narratives, and make sure that no one ever questions the true power behind the curtain. The system was built by them to be foolproof, a precise, closed machine where everything revolves around ignorance, repetition, and suffering, recycled in endless cycles. For millennia, this structure worked perfectly. The demiurge, satisfied with his throne of illusion, believed he had ended the last threat. Isolated pneumatics, tamed psychics, and submissive helics. Everything seemed consolidated. Until something he did not foresee crossed the prison walls, a force that could not be contained. It was not an external rebellion, nor a material attack. It came from within, and that was what dismantled them. The Tripartite Tractate describes this moment in almost cryptic detail. When the monad, the source from which everything emanates, realized that its creation had been distorted, it did not send a warrior, it did not send a savior. It introduced a silent but overwhelming presence, an incorruptible agent impossible to manipulate, immune to illusion. He came with no promises, preached no repentance. He merely rekindled what had been buried. This force was more than a presence. It was a living reminder of what existed before corruption, and its arrival could not be ignored. The Archons, accustomed to manipulating everything, recognized the immediate risk. This was not someone from outside trying to invade. It was the very code of the prison being rewritten from within, and their panic was absolute. What this force did was not impose a new truth. It was liberate the old one. Where there had been a pneumatic, there was now a focus of resistance. Each of them, feeling the call, began to break through the layers of imposed hypnosis. The illusion lost its shine, the veil was torn, and what emerged on the other side was recognition. I always knew. It was not a revelation, it was a memory. The Archon's terror was not irrational. They knew that once awakened, this force would spread like wildfire in a dry forest. The entire system depended on forgetfulness. The spark, if reactivated in sufficient numbers, would be like dynamite at the foundation of the world. That is why they moved with urgency. They rewrote doctrines. They converted sects. They swallowed entire movements. And they did so with the same strategy as always. Turning poison into medicine, but medicine that kept the patient under control. That is why all religions carry small truths, just enough to give comfort, never to liberate. Because if you realized that everything you seek is within, the system would lose its reason for existing. The demiurge taught that power is above, that heaven watches and judges, that the sacred is external and distant, but this new or ancient force reveals the opposite, that power springs from within, that the divine does not impose itself. It is remembered. That was the miscalculation. The system was designed to resist revolutions, but not memories. The Archons created a world where answers would always be out of reach, but they never considered that they were, all along, at the core of every pneumatic. So when that power awakened, they tried to hijack it. They used their usual resources: false enlightenment, promises of ascension, manufactured gurus, monitored transcendent experiences. They invented awakenings that ended in new prisons. They created spiritual lines that seemed liberating, but ended up leading back to the same starting point. Thus, the ages continued to pass, with empty revolutions, stifled movements, and exhausted seekers, and yet the pattern kept repeating itself, because every now and then someone managed to escape the web. Someone managed to remember, and that memory became a spark. They knew it would happen eventually, that there would come a point when all the distractions would lose their effect, that the weight of accumulated lies would make it impossible to sustain the charade. What they didn't expect was how fast it would come. Knowledge, once hidden in forgotten manuscripts, began to circulate. Texts that had been rejected and labeled heresy began to be read by those who were supposed to be hypnotized, and the pneumatics, for centuries so distant from one another, began to find each other. Connections multiplied. The right questions began to be asked. False paths began to fail. Control, once absolute, gave way to instability. They tried to reinforce the barriers. They increased the noise, but nothing prevented the crack from widening. This is the moment that the tripartite agreement suggested. The moment when collapse is no longer avoidable. The illusion begins to implode. Those who seem most fragile reveal themselves to be the most dangerous to the system, not because of their strength, but because of the truth they hold. Because they carry something that should never have survived, the original spark. For ages, the Archons have strengthened themselves with silence, ignorance, and separation. But now, information spreads faster than they can erase it. The force that the monad introduced was not to destroy the system with violence, but to poison it with truth. A kind of truth that, once awakened, can no longer be ignored, discredited, or silenced. You have been trained to seek answers outside yourself, to obey external voices, to follow maps drawn by invisible hands. But the map has never been outside. The path has always been within. And this discovery is what destroys everything the Archons have built. They do not fear a revolution. They fear a memory. They fear that you will discover that you never needed them, that your imprisonment depends on your belief in it, that the veil, however thick it may seem, is made only of ideas. And now you are beginning to see through it. The Archons have done everything to maintain control. They have launched distractions, created empty movements, filled the world with noise and false promises. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated the speed with which the spark awakens when touched by the truth. They believed they could manipulate perception indefinitely, that they would always have another era to silence those who began to see. They were wrong. Because now the eyes are open, and what was once a whisper has become certainty. They don't want you to realize the obvious. The power they always seemed to have was never real. The demiurge is not divine. He was never more than a distorted fragment, an arrogant accident amid original perfection. His Archons, dependent on what they do not understand. They do not create, they do not inspire, they only consume what others generate. They are soul vampires, living off a spark they do not possess. All that sustained their empire was ignorance. Without it, nothing else works. And when you leave the game is over. It's that simple. The Tripartite Tractate points to what is to come, not as a threat, but as a consequence. The pneumatics, the bearers of the divine essence, are not awakening by chance. They are returning to where they belong. They were never meant to be controlled. Their connection to the monad makes them untouchable the moment they recognize their true nature. The psychics, those who have always oscillated between light and shadow, will have to decide: continue to sustain the empire of liars or break away from it all and remember who they really are. The choice is theirs, but there will be no more neutrality. There is no more room for the undecided. And the helix, empty since their origin, will dissolve along with the collapse of the illusion. Without the system, there is no function left. Without lies, there is no identity left. The demiurge knows this. He feels the structure sinking beneath his feet. The prison he built is crumbling. The walls are cracking. The truth is leaking out, and his time is running out. Because now the erased are returning. They are remembering. They are rebuilding, not to dominate but to restore. What has been corrupted is being remade from within. Those he tried to erase are the ones redrawing the contours of existence, and this time there is no silence.